Official introduction, Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast. Let's just jump into it. I know you did a podcast last night. What do you think about the Kings hiring Mike Brown?
I love it. I mean, let's be realistic here. Mike Brown was never my first choice. He was never top of my list. I think, D'Lo, even though you love Mike Brown, you said the same thing. But out of the list of coaches that the Kings could go out and get, Mike Brown is one of the safest that the Kings could get. And some people might hear that term and think that as a negative. Oh, the Kings made a safe play. It's boring. It's not going to work. I think in the Kings situation, and when you've missed the playoffs for 16 straight seasons, you're not in a position to try and necessarily go for the home run or go for a blockbuster type move like a Mark Jackson move might have been. Even if I do believe, and Kenny, you and I talked a lot about this last week, I do believe Mark Jackson, basketball wise, could have come into Sacramento and made an impact. I just didn't think the Kings were the right team to take the flyer on the guy out of the other however many teams he's interviewed for over the last 8 years, and they didn't give him that position. Taking Mike Brown, D'Lo, you said earlier in the show, he's the best coach the Kings have had since Rick Adelman. The accolades say so. The reputation says so. His numbers say so. I know you guys were just discussing the conversation of having LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, and hell yeah, that's going to make your win-loss record a lot easier than having De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. But if you have a reputation of being able to work with stars in the NBA, that only raises your value for a guy like De'Aaron, for a guy like Sabonis, any young guy that comes through Sacramento and says, okay, I'm playing for a coach that took a LeBron James team to the NBA Finals. And I was guilty of, almost like you were talking about, using that as an argument against Brown because he didn't win a championship. I wasn't trying to undercut Brown. My point was it's hard to look at the success that Brown had in Cleveland and try and put two and two together with the success that he could have in Sacramento because there isn't a LeBron James here. But that doesn't mean that Brown can't be successful with De'Aaron, Sabonis, and this roster that the Kings still have to drastically improve this offseason. So overall, I think this is the right move, especially out of the three finalists. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but it sounds like Monty got his guy. And if that's the case, then everybody should be applauded.
Oh, Monty got his guy. Hold that thought, KC. We're going to come back. That's what we'll start with. We'll come back about Monty getting his guy because I think Kenny was about to tee off on that remark. Matt George is here with us. We got a long list of guests coming up, including Matt Barnes, Jason Lloyd, and James Ham, all on the way here on Sacramento's #1 sports station, ESPN 1320. Clear.
The Cubs stink.
Sorry, I hopped on a bit early because I thought my son was going to bed, and he is currently flinging his milk bottle around his crib.
Nice.
But he's quiet, so I'll take it.
Swinging around your head like a helicopter. Good stuff.
You'll probably, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there he is.
Yeah, there he is. Man, he looked like you with the McQueen.
He's throwing back in celebration of the Mike Brown hire.
Looking like you with the McQueen.
I think it's 143.
What Monty got his guy. That's where we're at.
Be nice to me, Kenny.
Oh no. I just got questions. That's all. I just got questions. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Rhonda's eye makeup is always interesting.
And once again, she's coming out giving high fives to the fans and smiling, and then she does this whole saying bitch into the microphone 4 different times. It's like, pick who you want to be. You're gonna be this fun little baby face that smiles all the time, but then gets pissed off when you're in the ring. Like,
really surprised they did the baby face thing. Really surprised.
I mean, Charlotte's a great heel, but
she's like it. Yeah, she's phenomenal.
That was one of they did a really good job, so I'm not disrespecting it, but there have been so many massive I Quit matches in WWE's history that one felt a little underwhelming. The I Quit, one of the greatest I Quit matches of all time was Randy Orton versus John Cena, when that was like the peak of their heated feud. They had a massive I Quit match. That was like skinhead Randy Orton when he was evil, punting everybody, and that match he tied.
Skinhead would be the way I describe it, but
I've heard that's how I heard it called, and it actually not a lie. That was actually the name of one of his skins in a WWE video game before.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's probably not today. That was years ago. But I'm sorry, Legacy leader Randy Orton.
Oh,
How about
there
that?
we go. All right. All right.
But Randy like handcuffed John Cena to the ropes or to the ring post and then beat the crap out of him with a kendo stick and stuff for like 10 straight minutes. It was a brutal match, but that was a great I Quit match.
I don't know where the Cena Orton match was, but I feel like maybe it's because it was Backlash that it felt a little underwhelming. Like if that was Money in the Bank, you know, at a bigger pay-per-view, maybe people would have. Because I remember hearing it was an I Quit match, but I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about I Quit. All right.
And speaking of Randy Orton, babyface Randy Orton is finally growing on me. It took me a long time, but RK Bro Randy Orton, he looks like he's having the time of his life right now. So I'm finally starting to come along with it.
Good for him.
Probably
grow on me.
It's probably too difficult for him to be a heel. Like when you've been around this long, people just kind of like you.
Well, that's true.
You'd have to work really hard. Some guys don't want to work that hard.
He's like Undertaker.
Well,
Undertaker was just Taker.
Well, if he ever turns heel again,
he didn't turn heel until his little docuseries started airing. Hey, while everyone's watching, could y'all hit the thumbs up? We've obviously got a good number of people in here on Twitch and YouTube and Facebook as well. We appreciate you guys so much. But if you could hit the thumbs up, man. If you're not a subscriber yet, become one. I think you'll enjoy the show on a daily basis. You'll enjoy all the videos that get posted in addition to the live show. So if you could amuse our vanity and help our show grow by hitting the thumbs up, man, we really appreciate it.
Did you guys see that UFC post-fight comment that I posted earlier?
Yep. Saw that.
Hold on.
Saw that. That was interesting.
That's a wild boy right there.
I was like, wait,
yeah.
Here? We're coming back, guys. Hang on. Live on the Odyssey app, live on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook Live as well. And don't worry, King's coverage doesn't end today at 4:00. King's coverage continues all the way till 6:00. Then we'll be heading out to the Golden State Warriors and Memphis Grizzlies after that. So no need to go anywhere when we wrap up at 4 because you'll get more Kings coverage throughout the day here until 6:00 on ESPN 1320. We got Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast. Matt just made it a point to say, man, I feel good about this Mike Brown hire because Kenny, Monte McNair seems to have gotten his guy.
Look, and people may think I'm about to go. I'm not going to go in on Matt. I just need to know, when is this going to stop? When is this whole Vivek is meddling and it's always when is it going to stop? When are you guys going to see? It's not. It doesn't seem to be like that at all. Because if it's about him, like Damian said earlier, if it's about him meddling and trying to get his way, he sure does suck at it because he never gets his way. It seems like the basketball people always seem to get their way. He loses all these battles. When is this going to stop?
So, two things. First off, Courtside Kenny is trying to get seats with the owner next season, and I appreciate it, and I really like it.
Courtside Kenny doesn't need Vivek trying to get seats next to Courtside Kenny.
That's a good point. No, I appreciate you, Kenny. I've been listening to y'all all week long. I've heard all the points that you guys have been making. One of the reasons why I bring that up is because last week y'all had me on when it was like right after the Mark Stein news dropped. And one of the things I tweeted this out yesterday, like I brought a lot of negative energy both to the show and to the podcast after that I was not happy to see Vivek's name brought up, period. Because of, and you guys talked a lot last week about, hey, where's the source coming from? I agree with you 100%. This source is coming from someone who does not have the best interest of the Kings at heart. And I mentioned this on the podcast last night or this morning. If you there's no reason to believe that Vivek didn't like the idea of Mark Jackson. Mark Jackson wasn't his opinion or his pick or the guy that he favored, but he always trusted Monte McNair to make the decision, and he was just sharing his 2 cents like every NBA owner does in a decision like this. So for me, bringing it up is if I'm going to give it negative energy when this unconfirmed rumor and report comes out that Vivek might have a favorite, then I have to give praise and positive energy to when the actual hire is made and it's not the guy that is reported. So my point in bringing it up is this. I think Vivek Ranadive, I think Monte McNair, I think the Kings' entire front office deserves credit for going about this the right way and hiring the guy that the general manager wanted, assuming that that's the case, but all signs point to that being the case. There's no reason to believe otherwise at this point in time. So that's why I bring it up, Kenny. But I do push back a little bit on Vivek's reputation is, and it's not just him, Kings ownership's reputation over the last 9 years. There's a reason why it is what it is. We could talk about the Nick Stauskas thing, which you guys have already talked about a lot. Kenny, I think I texted you during a show when you were asking for examples.
Back on that, by the way, I didn't mean to text you back. My bad, bro.
It's all good. Like the 2 examples, there's a recent example of, I think it was a Jordan Clarkson trade that fell through. Again, don't know where the source is coming from. A Jordan Clarkson trade that fell through because Vivek took too long because he asked different advisors around the league. There's situations like that. And then speaking of from personal experience, I had George Karl on the Locked On Kings podcast a couple of years ago, and you can roll your eyes at George and the time that he spent here. But one of the things George told me specifically that there were many instances where Vivek would get a big table in a conference room together of coaches and assistant coaches, general managers, Vlade, ownership, and they would all share their opinions and discuss decisions involving the Sacramento Kings. And George Karl said specifically that he always felt like there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and he felt like the basketball minds, aka himself, his coaches, their opinions were not taken into account and were often overshadowed by Vivek, his advisors, and ownership. So that's what I'm bringing to the table. Yes, Damian Barling in the back.
How long ago was George Karl here?
I agree. I understand. 100% you're right. And things have changed. I agree. Things look to be trending in the right direction, especially since Monte McNair took over. All signs point to this has been McNair's team. D'Lo, we discussed like there is a chance that Luke Walton was brought back by Monte McNair because of financial implications. Either way, we 100% agree that the second Monte McNair brought Luke Walton back, he became Monte McNair's guy. Yeah. So Monte is not left off the hook for firing Walton 20 games into the season. So even if Vivek and ownership financially had any kind of influence on that move, it still is Monte McNair's.
It literally didn't save them any money. Like it literally didn't save them very much money, we should say.
Right. And they're still paying him right now. Yeah. So, or is this contract up?
No, they're still paying.
No, they're still paying him.
They're paying Vlade, Luke, and Alvin next season.
They bought his ticket courtside for the Warriors game a couple nights ago. So good on the Kings for doing that for him. But it's a long-winded way of saying, Kenny, I understand where you're coming from. I do have the concerns still of ownership over involvement because I've seen the patterns. The Kings have been so bad for this entire time that Vivek has been here. He has been one of the major consistents, but I give him all the credit in the world. I give McNair all the credit in the world for this hire. I think it is the right hire. And if indeed Vivek preferred Mark Jackson, but allowed Monte to hire the guy that he wanted, Vivek did it 100% right and doesn't deserve any kind of the anger or frustration that I brought to the table after the reports last week.
Shame on you, Matt.
Yeah, that damn Matt George. I always say this though when it comes to Vivek and the reports of meddling. The two things. The two things it's coincidental maybe. But number one, it's always the same report. The names are just changed, right? Like, Vivek is meddling again in free agent acquisitions and trades and draft picks and all this other stuff. And then do you notice how he's always on the perceived wrong side? Like after a while, after like people have kind of, figured out who they want, whether it's the coach or the draft pick or whatever, the report comes out and Vivek is always on the wrong side, right? Does that just seem like a coincidence to you?
Vivek really wanted Darvin Ham. Like, it's never
always on the quote unquote wrong side. It's just convenient. It's just convenient. That's all I'm saying.
Do y'all remember which side? I remember reading a report. It didn't really go anywhere, but when the Kings were down to their final 2 or 3 names for general manager before they hired McNair, I remember reading something that Vivek and his son, I think, disagreed on who the guy was going to be. And I think Vivek wanted McNair. I can't remember. I read this a while ago. It was a little mentioned thing, kind of a throwaway line in some kind of article or something or another. But I mean, that almost kind of plays to your point. But until the Sacramento Kings win, like, we're going to point to the most consistent parts of an issue that has gone beyond the 9 years that he's been here, granted. But the last 9 years, he and ownership have been the one constant when coaches, general managers, and players have come in and left. So I don't really see that changing at all until the Kings start winning. And I think in terms of hiring a head coach that can get you close to that, the Kings did the right job, or a great job, in bringing in Mike Brown.
And what does Mike Brown mean for the roster now? So let's take a look at this. What do you think Mike Brown could mean for, let's start with Dante DiVincenzo, because he's a bit of a question mark here headed into the offseason, given that his team seems to have a poor relationship with some members of the Sacramento Kings front office. And I mean, Dante DiVincenzo. What's that?
The basketball people.
The basketball people.
No, Vivek didn't want to start him. Vivek didn't want to start him.
The people we got to listen to blindly, the basketball people, they're not handling this situation that well. Okay.
Dante DiVincenzo seems like a perfect player for Mike Brown and what he wants to do.
100%. Everybody knows Mike Brown would have played Dante DiVincenzo and started DiVincenzo last season, so all of that can be brushed under the rug now. That's how we're going to play it off.
Told not to.
But Mike Brown wouldn't have listened to being told not to. Mike Brown does his own thing when he wants to do it. Everybody
it wouldn't shock me if that's a provision in his upcoming contract.
Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I will be your head coach if you leave me the hell alone.
Being your head coach reserves the right to, coach the team.
Weird. What a concept. Yeah. Before I talk about DiVincenzo specifically, I mentioned this on the podcast too. Like, I initially felt like the Kings were almost moving a little too fast on this hire. Like, it surprised me that we had a list of finalists as early as we did. And here we are, May 9th, the second round of the playoffs, and that guy is hired. And at first I thought, are the Kings moving too fast and almost handicapping themselves, not giving themselves enough time to interview more candidates? But the more I thought about it, the more it makes sense. Monte McNair and the Kings still have so much work to do this offseason. They have so many decisions to make that it makes sense to want to get this move over and done with, especially if you can get your guy right away so that Mike Brown can now be involved, or at least share his opinions in basketball decision-making, personnel decision-making for the remainder of this offseason. So to your point about Dante DiVincenzo, I have to believe that I believe the Kings were already high on the idea of bringing him back and re-signing him as a restricted free agent. I have to believe Mike Brown goes, yeah, bring this guy back because he fits my system. He's the type of player that I know I can work with, and I believe we can do good things with him. So, I mean, I like the idea of Dante DiVincenzo in a Mike Brown system. I think he fits excellent. I love the idea of a Davion Mitchell in a Mike Brown system. And I'm sure we're going to get to this too. Like, a lot of what Mike Brown has to do immediately if the Kings want to get results is maximize De'Aaron Fox. That's not all on Brown. If Fox doesn't reach his potential, it's not Brown's fault necessarily, but that's a major part of this hire too. And when you're bringing in a defensive mind, you're going to need De'Aaron Fox to buy in defensively. That's going to be task numero uno for Mike Brown as soon as training camp begins.
Oh, yes. Another key. We've got to unlock him.
Keys open doors. But yeah, Dante, I feel like he'd be a Mike Brown type player. I feel like that's a good marriage right there. And I think he'd be a good guy next to De'Aaron Fox, where, it doesn't absolve De'Aaron of having to be better on the defensive end or carry his weight, but it also doesn't place unrealistic expectations or place all the burden on him to be this perimeter lockdown guy. You've got help back there. You've got a guy that understands on the defensive end just naturally where he's supposed to be, what he's supposed to do. That could help him out back there. Davion could do the same thing, but I feel like Dante would be better for what Mike Brown is trying to do initially, at least in my opinion. And Matt, you also mentioned about how initially you thought that the Kings kind of rushed a little bit, and other people had that. I was on Twitter on Saturday like, yo, what's taking so long? I was on the opposite end of that too. And really where that came from is people look at it and they're like, oh, they took 27 days to hire their next head coach. And I look at it as it should have been 50. You knew Gentry was gone a long time ago. Starting the process, by the time the season ended, the only thing that should have happened, in my opinion, were the interviews. You should have already known who you were going after. You should have already known their strengths, their weaknesses, what you liked about them, what you didn't like about them. Only thing left was to talk to them in person and see if they matched up or if you learned anything different. But people talking about this as a 27-day process shouldn't be. It should have been about 47, 50-day process that they just went through, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't need to see a leaked picture of Monte McNair's whiteboard in the background to get to believe that there's a list of coaches already written down, or that McNair had an idea of guys that he'd be interested in talking to, especially if, like, what stood out to me from the press release today, two things from McNair's quote, and it's pretty consistent through this entire coaching search. One was defense, and two was experience. And Mike Brown clearly checks both those boxes. Hell, for the most part, all three candidates, you could argue Mark Jackson a little bit about experience, but at least he's been an NBA head coach before. You could argue all three guys check that box. So if that was the idea going into this next coaching search, when you knew Alvin Gentry wasn't going to be that guy, wasn't going to be coming back, yeah, I'm pretty confident in believing that Mike Brown was a name on Monte McNair's radar and that Monte was interested in well before the season concluded. That being said, still, after the season ends, like you said, you got to do the multiple rounds of interviews, especially when you had as long of a list initially that was reported. And remember, that list wasn't, I don't think that was the full list. They were amongst the candidates, and there might have been other names on there that the Kings were interested in that maybe interviews didn't happen, like a Kenny Atkinson maybe, or there could have been other names that did happen that just weren't really worth mentioning or never got reported. So I just felt that, and we still don't know, like, I guess Quinn Snyder is supposed to speak to the media today or something like that. We don't know what Quinn Snyder's future is. There could have been other coaches made available. I just personally...
He about to be Batista. I quit.
That would be a moment. He just fires shots at Rudy Gobert the entire time, touches all the microphones and leaves. I would love it. Regardless, like, I felt that, especially after hearing McNair say, we're going to take our time in his postseason press conference, for us to get to this point this quickly, it surprised me a little bit. But again, it makes sense why, with the amount of basketball decisions that McNair still has to make this offseason. Now the real work begins, truth be told, because even as much as I like Mike Brown, as I do believe if the Kings roster stay the exact same, Mike Brown could get this roster into the play-in. But I think Mike Brown will fail in Sacramento if the Kings don't drastically improve this roster, and Monty's got that work to do starting today.
Well, it shouldn't start today. It should have started months ago, right, Kenny?
Well, look here. If Mike Brown is interviewing for the job, he should know everything about this roster and what he want to do. If I'm interviewing, I should have an in-depth look and be ready to tell Monte McNair exactly how I would go about this. So yeah.
You're listening to D'Lo and KC on ESPN 1320 KIFM West Sacramento, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento, and Odyssey Station, and driven by Lashers, Elk Grove Dodge. Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast, with us here. Matt Barnes coming up in just a few minutes. Jason Lloyd, who covered the Cleveland Cavaliers, still covers the Cleveland Cavaliers for The Athletic, covered Mike Brown back in his time with Cleveland. He'll be with us here in this 2 o'clock hour as well. James Ham coming up. Mike Brown, universally respected around the league. Steve Kerr had some tremendous things to say about him earlier today, as a matter of fact. Do you think this becomes, with Monty getting his guy, Mike Brown being a respected coach around the league, you think this becomes a more attractive place for free agents? Like, fine, but it becomes like a little bit more of a appealing, like the thought of it, like, okay, I see what's going on here. They went and got Sabonis. They brought in Mike Brown. By the way, Mike Brown is like the latest in a commitment to defense from Monte McNair. Mm-hmm. Given the fact that this guy came from Houston, and we know what the Houston Rockets were, Davion, Dante DiVincenzo was, the first move he tried to make. Like he's clearly locked into the shortcomings of this franchise. But I wonder if the addition to Mike Brown and at least the perhaps illusion of stability may help them this offseason.
Yeah, I think players, agents, coaches, whoever looking at the Sacramento Kings are still smart enough to recognize that 16 years of terrible culture doesn't just change with one hire before the guy's even here. So I don't know if I'm ready to go that far yet. I will say, though, I don't think anybody is going to hold a hire like this, hiring Mike Brown, against Monte McNair at any point. If it doesn't work, like you guys were just talking about, maybe that's on De'Aaron Fox. Maybe that's on something else. The players that are on the court, or Mike Brown's system didn't just work or anything. But no one's going to turn around when McNair's career is said and done and go, wow, he hired Mike Brown. What an idiot. Like that, or what a terrible hire. It's a terrible decision. There's a lot of reasons why, like we've already talked about, it makes a whole lot of sense. So I look at it less as more attractive to maybe people who are going to join the team, and I look at it as very attractive for the players that are currently here. Like, we asked both De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis in their postseason press conferences if they wanted to be involved in this decision. Domantas Sabonis flat out said, "Yeah, I'd appreciate my opinion being heard." De'Aaron Fox said he would have conversations, but he didn't care or didn't mind like his opinion being heard or not, or being involved in the decision or not. Regardless, like you need your stars to support your head coach, and I have a hard time believing that Sabonis or Fox could find any reason not to be happy about Mike Brown being here in Sacramento. So I think that's the most important part, because you got to get those two to buy in to the culture that you want to set before you can. And I mean, even having guys like Davion Mitchell and Dante DiVincenzo, hell yeah, they're probably attractive for Mike Brown, because he doesn't have to sell them too much on what he's trying to bring to the table. He knows they're going to be ready to go day one. So getting those guys to buy in, I think that's what starts to make everything more attractive. And hopefully the wins that come after that, that's what starts to make everything attractive for everybody else. But I think from an outside perspective, you can look at what Sacramento's doing and go, they probably still have a long way to go, and I'll believe it when I see it. But I at least see them trying to make progress and trying to make smart decisions versus taking a flyer and trying to catch lightning in a bottle.
Matt, are you like me in this respect that you're expecting them to make the playoffs next year? I mean, 10 seed playing, all this other stuff. The situation can't be the same this year. I'll put it to you like that.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm expecting. If they don't do that, it's a failure on Monte McNair's part and the entire roster and the coaching staff.
100%. Absolutely. 100%. You go into a season with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis on your roster. I know, and I expect the Western Conference to get better. I'm not naive to that. I don't think the West is going to be as bad next year as it was this year, and the Kings still couldn't make it. Like, the Kings have to be better. Now, I'm trying to be more realistic this offseason and next season than I was going into this season, because yikes. But overall, the Sacramento Kings, they at minimum have to be a play-in team. And I said the same thing last year, but ultimately you want to see the Kings building a foundation that they can build upon year after year after year after year. As much as we want to say you don't build a team to just make the playoffs, you build a team to win a championship. You got to walk before you can run type thing. So if the Kings can get into the playoffs, and for me, success is the Kings playing in a legitimate playoff series. If the Kings were to be a 7th, 8th, 9th, or 10th seed, host or on the road, lose a play-in game and miss the playoffs, then to me, you're just glorified NBA purgatory still. Maybe you played one or two more important, exciting games that got the fan base a little bit excited, but still, where are you at? Like, unless the season went really, really well and then catastrophic injuries, knock on wood, like derailed your progress, and anything can happen. But for me, it's get the Kings into a best of 7 series, even if they're 8th seed versus 1st seed. If they get swept and wipe the floor, who cares? Get them there and then build upon that next offseason and the offseason after. That is my bar for success this offseason, Kenny. And anything less absolutely is a failure. And it is not going to be all on one guy like we sometimes try and make it out to be.
Do you think the roster needs massive improvement now that we can get back to worrying about the team? Do you think the roster needs massive improvement or tweaks?
Yeah, I said massive improvement, but I understand that is suggesting that the Kings need to potentially replace Fox or Sabonis, which I don't necessarily agree with. I do believe everybody's on the table. The Kings aren't good enough not to have everybody on the table. And if McNair, the right move, whatever that means, is there for Monty, that he'll pull the trigger and send Fox or Sabonis packing. I don't think he's closed-minded to that, but I think we can all feel pretty comfortable in saying that Fox and Sabonis are going to be the 1 and 2, A and B, going into next season. So I think the Kings need to massively work to improve their overall roster, surround that talent with players that are, one, going to fit with that Fox and Sabonis style, like a floor spacing, rim protecting big, or a two guard that can also space the floor, shooters to surround Fox and Sabonis with. But in addition to that, now they have to also fit the system that Mike Brown is going to try to implement, which I guarantee you he sold McNair on. That's the reason why he got the job. So Brown knows, or probably has a pretty good idea of what kind of system he wants to run. Now you have to go and get players that fit that system. And to me, still, one of the top priorities for this offseason is you have to go into next year with a bona fide established starting 5. I don't want to, even if Donte DiVincenzo is a starting 2 next year, I can make an argument that maybe the Kings could have done better. But I believe DiVincenzo can be a starting 5, or a part of a starting 5 that is a playoff team in the Western Conference. I don't need players like, no disrespect, Justin Holiday, who, well, yeah, he's starting here, but on 29 other teams, he probably wouldn't start. And like, I don't need even guys like Mo Harkless. Again, no disrespect. I don't need a roster of guys like that. Fringe talent, to me, needs to be taken care of. Kings need to go out and get an established starting 5 and then add 2 or 3 pieces off the bench to give you consistent minutes, realistic pieces off the bench. You're not going to get superstars coming off the bench to build some kind of super team. But if you can if Davion Mitchell is coming off the bench and you get him a shooter and a wing defender, or a big that can help him out as well, and pick up the slack if the starters are struggling, or carry on what the starters have done, the Kings are in good shape. But it's going to take a lot of work to fill those holes.
Real quick, Matt, what's the thing you're most excited about from Mark Brown? For me personally, it's the defense. I mean, that's something that's followed him every step of his way. And I'm anxious to see and excited to see what he can come up with this group and what he can bring to Sacramento in that respect.
Yeah, for me, it's simply, what can he get De'Aaron Fox to buy into? Like, if Mike Brown is going to come in here with a defensive background and he's going to bring this defensive culture and identity to Sacramento, but he doesn't get his best player, his star, his max player to completely buy into that, then it's going to fail. Like, if Fox needs to lead by example. So to me, I'm most excited to see, not just early in the season, because we've talked about Fox needs to get rid of these slow starts and needs to come out the gate playing at the level that we expect him to play at and then carry that through. But it's not just offensively. Like, De'Aaron could get better offensively, could hit more 3-point shots, could hit more free throws, and that would probably help his all-star status. But the biggest area of growth, the biggest area of unlocking De'Aaron Fox, D'Lo, to me, is getting him to buy in and play consistent defense. He doesn't have to become a great defender overnight. I don't think that's realistic. I don't know how much better Fox is going to get defensively, but we've seen he's capable of playing good defense when he buys into it, or when he tries. We've seen him in the fourth quarter clamp down when he's had to from time to time. If Brown can get that to be common or frequent and not infrequent like it is currently, then that's part 1 to success.
Appreciate you, Matt George, host of the Locked On Kings podcast. Subscribe here on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you get podcasts from, be it Odyssey, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, whatever it may be. From